The 5th of May became a defining moment in the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway long described as one of the world's most vital energy arteries. In the space of just a few hours, a region already known for tension witnessed a military display unlike anything seen there in many years. What unfolded was not presented as a routine patrol. It was a direct and highly visible show of force. United States Army AH-64 Apache attack helicopters working alongside United States Navy MH-60 Seahawk helicopters moved into combat formation over one of the most strategic shipping lanes on Earth. The message was difficult to miss. Washington appeared determined to show that it was ready for a much more intense confrontation if necessary, and the audience for that message was not only Iran, but every government and shipping company watching the Gulf with growing concern. Tehran answered quickly in the information space. Iranian officials insisted that the movements of their fast boats were lawful actions taken to defend national sovereignty. They accused the United States of destabilizing the region through dangerous military activity close to Iranian waters. Figures linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps went further. They warned of strategic deterrent measures and asymmetric retaliation if Washington continued its pressure. On television and across regional media, the language hardened by the hour. But the picture at sea looked very different. While those statements were still circulating, American helicopters had already completed their rapid deployment and taken tactical positions and begun tracking targets on the water. 6 Iranian high-speed attack boats became the focus of the entire U.S. response. In Western military discussions, Iran's fast boat doctrine is often described as a mosquito fleet tactic. The term refers to swarming operations by many small, fast craft intended to harass larger warships, disrupt shipping, and create psychological pressure. In the Gulf, that concept has been studied for decades. What drew the most attention this time was not simply the presence of Iranian boats. It was the speed and coordination of the American reaction. The joint use of Army and Navy helicopters in the Strait of Hormuz suggested that Washington had prepared for high-intensity scenarios in the most sensitive waters of the Middle East. The 4th of May had already become a day of exceptional tension. According to U.S. accounts, 6 Iranian fast attack craft appeared on the water during what was described as a dangerous close approach operation. Yet what shocked many military observers was the claim that none of those boats returned after encountering American forces. U.S. Central Command Commander Admiral Brad Cooper reportedly confirmed strikes against Iranian forces. American military assessments have long held that Iran often deploys anywhere from 20 to 40 fast boats in swarm formations to pressure enemy vessels and unsettle traffic along strategic sea lanes. That pattern has triggered alarms across the Gulf more than once, and this time, however, the reported formation was smaller. Only 6 boats were said to have been sent forward, and within minutes of making contact, the entire group disappeared from the surface picture. At the same moment, 2 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, USS Truxtun and USS Mason, completed a transit through the strait under close protection from helicopters and U.S. air assets. The 2 warships were operating alongside American-flagged commercial vessels in what was described as an unusually large escort mission. Military reports released the following morning stated that Iranian forces had launched a combination of missiles, drones, and fast boats against the U.S. formation. According to the same reports, every threat was intercepted before reaching its target. No American warship was reported damaged. That was also the point at which Operation Project Freedom was said to have formally begun. In less than a day, 2 American commercial vessels were confirmed to have passed through the strait safely. For Washington, the objective seemed clear: demonstrate to the world that the United States still had the capacity to secure the most important maritime corridor in the Middle East, despite Iranian threats. President Donald Trump later posted a short message on Truth Social. He wrote that this was all they had left. The statement was widely understood as a direct reference to Iran's fast boat force, a tactic on which Tehran has placed significant emphasis in scenarios involving disruption or closure of the strait. As combat intensified on the water, the regional media arena became just as active. Al Jazeera carried an Iranian claim that 5 civilians aboard a passenger vessel had been killed by the U.S. military. Yet many observers quickly questioned the accuracy of the report, especially because the fast boats had appeared in the same area where the clash with American forces was unfolding. That was the moment when the information war began to rival the confrontation at sea. Competing claims spread rapidly. Each side sought to define what had happened, why it had happened, and who was responsible for the escalation. Operation Project Freedom is now being described as a dangerous new phase in the Gulf confrontation. Iranian actions, according to American and regional reporting, appear designed to generate disorder across a much wider area than the strait itself. Images and battlefield summaries from the opening phase suggest that this moved beyond an ordinary maritime standoff very quickly. Tehran, by that reading, was using every remaining asymmetric tool to create pressure before the United States and its partners could tighten their military grip. Early military reporting claimed that one Iranian drone managed to slip through defenses and strike energy infrastructure in the United Arab Emirates, even though most of the remaining unmanned aircraft were intercepted. That incident mattered. It suggested that Iran was trying to widen the zone of instability beyond the Strait of Hormuz and turn the broader Gulf into an active pressure theater. In other words, the contest was no longer only about escorting ships through one narrow passage. It was about who could impose costs across the entire region. President Trump reacted with another sharply worded post. He said Iran had fired on uninvolved countries during Operation Project Freedom, including a South Korean cargo ship, and suggested that perhaps South Korea should join the operation. He added that the United States had destroyed 7 small boats, or as they like to call them, speedboats, and repeated that this was all they had left. The political meaning of that message was unmistakable. It signaled that Washington might seek to broaden the international coalition against Iranian military activity in the Gulf. It also reinforced the American narrative that Iran's most visible asymmetric tool was being progressively neutralized. During an urgent press briefing the next morning, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane outlined a number of battlefield details. According to the U.S. side, even after a ceasefire announcement had been made, Iran continued firing at commercial shipping and carried out more than 10 attacks against American forces. American officials stated that more than 2,000 sailors aboard 1,000 vessels had been stranded in or near the conflict zone. That claim transformed the episode from a military confrontation into a major maritime crisis, one with immediate humanitarian and economic implications. Washington accused the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of using the de facto blockade to turn civilian mariners into strategic hostages. For that reason, officials described Operation Project Freedom not just as a military mission, but as a large-scale humanitarian effort to reopen an international sea lane and help trap civilian shipping. According to those briefings, Iran also launched 1 attack against Oman and 3 more against the United Arab Emirates. This time, the American response was said to have come almost instantly. MH-60 Seahawk and AH-64 Apache helicopters moved in to counterattack, and the Strait of Hormuz remained under extreme tension. Operational summaries claimed that more than 100 fighter aircraft were being coordinated alongside the 82nd Airborne Division to provide direct protection for merchant vessels transiting the strait. By the time the briefing on the 5th of May took place, 2 American commercial ships had reportedly made the passage safely under a U.S. military shield. As the crisis escalated, social media added an almost surreal layer to the story. Regional platforms suddenly filled with rumors about so-called suicide dolphins. One reporter even raised the matter during a military press conference, producing a few seconds of disbelief before the room shifted into open sarcasm. Yet behind that strange distraction was a far more serious reality. The United States had begun a major operation to break pressure on the most strategic shipping route in the Middle East. And instead of fantastical weapons, what actually appeared over Hormuz were Apache and Seahawk helicopters built specifically to hunt fast-moving surface targets. The reasons for such a forceful American reaction lie in the scale of the crisis. U.S. military reporting claimed that shipping from 87 countries had been delayed, harassed, or trapped since Iran effectively tightened control around the Strait weeks earlier. If true, that would mean the pressure campaign had already crossed from a bilateral confrontation into a global transport emergency. On the first day of Operation Project Freedom, U.S. Central Command committed what it described as an overwhelming package of assets. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers formed the surface spearhead. Above them, a layered defensive network was created by Apache helicopters, more than 100 fighter aircraft, and multiple unmanned systems. Iran, in response, appeared to use the tools most closely associated with its asymmetric doctrine. Shore-launched anti-ship missiles were reportedly fired at the American formation but intercepted. Waves of drones were sent to probe the air defense screen, and most importantly, fast boats were pushed forward in the familiar swarm pattern south of the strait. In naval doctrine, swarm attacks rely on speed, numbers, and confusion. Many small craft approach from multiple directions, attempting to overwhelm the defenses of a larger warship. The goal is simple: close the distance, fire quickly, and withdraw before the target can respond effectively. But this time, the defending force was built around something very different. Apache helicopters, according to American descriptions, hunted and disabled the Iranian fast boats at a distance before they could reach effective attack range. If that account is accurate, then the very premise of the swarm tactic was under direct challenge. In practical terms, the Iranian method at Hormuz resembled a coordinated harassment assault with fast craft darting toward targets like a cloud of insects over the water. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has trained for exactly this kind of operation for years. It has long been treated as one of Tehran's signature options for threatening traffic through a narrow and vital waterway. What proved shocking was the reported outcome. Iran deployed 6 high-speed attack boats, and all 6 were said to have been sunk almost immediately after closing on the target. If accurate, that result would represent not just a failed attack, but a severe setback for a doctrine designed over decades to exploit geography and surprise. American crews had spent years preparing for this possibility. Low-altitude pursuit, target acquisition over water, and rapid engagement of fast boats have been standard elements in many U.S. training cycles. Even deployments far from the Gulf included scenarios built around a future clash with Iranian swarm tactics. So when the real encounter came, the crews of the Apache and Seahawk helicopters were not improvising. They were operating inside a threat profile they already knew well. The response, by all available accounts, was immediate. American helicopters reportedly opened fire directly on the approaching formation. The outcome was described as decisive. All 6 Iranian attack boats were sunk. U.S. Central Command stated that the full engagement had been tracked and that every Iranian missile and drone aimed at the 2 destroyers was intercepted successfully. After the clash, USS Truxtun and USS Mason were said to have completed the transit without being stopped. 2 American-flagged commercial ships also passed through safely under U.S. naval protection. Iranian state-linked media, especially Fars News, which is often viewed as closely aligned with the Revolutionary Guard, offered a very different version. It claimed that a U.S. warship had been hit by 2 missiles and forced to withdraw from waters near Jask. The American military response was brief and categorical. That did not happen, officials said. From the U.S. perspective, the intended Iranian targets were not American warships at all, but civilian commercial traffic crossing the strait. That is why, in Washington's telling, naval intervention was immediate and necessary. Protecting the strategic transport corridor had become the mission. At roughly the same time, the United Arab Emirates confirmed additional Iranian missile and drone attacks against oil infrastructure near Fujairah, close to the Strait of Hormuz. Emirati air defenses reportedly intercepted 15 missiles and 4 drones, though one unmanned aircraft still got through, causing a fire and injuring 3 Indian nationals. As the tension reached a new peak, President Trump issued what many saw as his strongest warning yet to Tehran. He declared that any further interference by Iran could result in the regime being blown off the face of the earth. The statement referred not only to current military events, but also to the broader purpose of the operation, protecting civilians, businesses, and countries not directly involved in the conflict. And when that day drew to a close, commercial ships were still moving through the strait. American warships were reported intact. Iran, meanwhile, had lost 6 more fast boats in what many analysts identified as a serious blow to its Mosquito Fleet doctrine. These were not ordinary boats. They formed the backbone of an asymmetric naval strategy that Tehran has spent decades building and refining. In a direct confrontation with superior conventional sea power, such craft have been considered among Iran's most dangerous and practical tools. For that reason, Iran's Mosquito Fleet has never been dismissed lightly in Washington. U.S. military planners have simulated combat against precisely this tactic for many years. The fast attack craft, operated by the naval arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, were designed specifically for the shallow, narrow, island-filled waters around Hormuz. Their logic is straightforward: appear quickly, strike unexpectedly, withdraw before the larger opponent can react. Some versions of the concept went even further, with explosive-laden fast boats configured as unmanned or one-way attack platforms meant to ram commercial ships or warships. There was a time when the idea inspired dark jokes about needing exotic countermeasures. In reality, the systems that seem to concern Iranian fast boat crews most are much more conventional. A-64 Apache and MH-60 Seahawk helicopters. These fast boats are not harmless skiffs. They can carry rockets, anti-ship weapons, and heavy machine guns. General Dan Kane said at the morning briefing that the boats in the latest clash were armed only with light infantry weapons, but the greater danger lay in their potential use for close-range ramming or suicide attacks against warships and merchant traffic. Some of these craft can reportedly exceed 92 kilometers per hour. In the confined waters of the strait, that speed creates intense pressure and very little reaction time. And their danger also comes from coordination. They rarely operate alone. The real strength of the swarm lies in numbers, shifting vectors, and constant movements. The objective is to flood the defensive system of a larger ship with too many small threats at once. That challenge has forced the United States to think carefully about how to defend large, expensive warships in narrow seas. One number stands at the center of this crisis: 20%. That is the share of global seaborne oil trade that passes through the Strait of Hormuz each day. If that artery is blocked or turned into a prolonged war zone, the global energy market does not merely tighten, it convulses. Fuel prices in the United States had already begun to rise in response to turbulence around the strait, yet Washington framed that as a short-term price in a much longer contest. One intended to end what American officials described as Iran's long-running maritime blackmail of the world. For years, Tehran has been accused of using its position near Hormuz as a pressure instrument against the global economy. When nearly 1/5 of the world's oil shipments pass through a single narrow channel, geography becomes leverage. The United States is now signaling that it intends to reduce or eliminate that leverage. A second number widened the story beyond the United States and Iran. 87. American officials said ships from 87 countries had been trapped, delayed, or affected by harassment linked to Iranian pressure in the Strait. If that assessment holds, then Operation Project Freedom is not simply an American operation. It is a response to a maritime crisis affecting a large part of the international trading system. That figure also carries diplomatic weight. A conflict that touches shipping from 87 countries is no longer a local problem. It becomes a question of international order, maritime law, and the credibility of guarantees around freedom of navigation. But the most dramatic number in the entire episode may be the simplest: 6 out of 6. Iran reportedly sent 6 fast attack boats in the opening swarm. None returned. U.S. Central Command stated that the interception rate on the first day reached 100% against Iranian fast boats, drones, and missiles, for a military doctrine built around overwhelming defenses through mass and speed. That would amount to a deeply damaging outcome. Tehran would have launched an operation shaped by years of planning, only to see the entire package erased within minutes. That is more than a tactical disappointment. It is a warning about how severe a full U.S. response might become if the confrontation rises another level. Iranian officials and channels close to the Revolutionary Guard have continued to insist that they are only beginning, and that stronger deterrent measures remain available. Yet, the battlefield image, at least from the U.S. side, points in the opposite direction. 6 fast attack craft now rest on the seabed. The Iranian parliament has continued to call for stronger deterrence, but at this stage, the only deterrent image visible to much of the world is the destruction of a formation that was supposed to demonstrate resolve. That contrast has become central to the narrative war now unfolding around the crisis. So what exactly enabled the United States to execute such an effective interception? And why are those systems especially dangerous to Iran swarm doctrine? 2 platforms appear to have carried much of the burden in the fast boat battles around Hormuz, the AH-64 Apache and the MH-60 Seahawks. These are not ordinary utility aircraft. They are combat systems highly suited to the type of asymmetric maritime fight Iran has long prepared for. The AH-64 Apache is the U.S. Army's principal attack helicopter and one of the most recognizable weapons of modern warfare. Since entering service in the 1980s, it has evolved through multiple variants, with current frontline versions offering far more capable sensors, data links, and weapons integration than earlier models. In the Hormuz fighting, the Apache's most important weapon was almost certainly its M230 and 30mm chain gun mounted beneath the nose. That gun is linked directly to the crew's sighting and helmet systems. In practical terms, the gun can point where the operator looks against fast boats moving unpredictably at close range. That is a devastating advantage. The M230 fires at roughly 625 rounds per minute. Against lightly built boats with fiberglass or light composite hulls, even a short burst can destroy steering, disable the engine, or leave the craft dead in the water. But the Apache is not limited to gunfire. It can carry up to 16 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles on 4 underwing pylons. These laser-guided missiles can destroy targets from several kilometers away with high precision, giving the helicopter the ability to kill before the target is close enough to threaten the warship it is screening. The Apache can also carry as many as 76 Hydra rockets of roughly 7cm caliber for area suppression in a maritime engagement where multiple small boats are maneuvering together. So that kind of rocket volume can quickly turn a compact attack formation into a burning debris field. And the second key platform is the MH-60 Seahawk, the U.S. Navy's dedicated helicopter for anti-surface and maritime combat missions. If the Apache is a battlefield hunter adapted to the sea fight, the Seahawk is a naval predator built for exactly this environment. The MH-60 can carry Hellfire missiles for use against surface targets, along with heavy machine guns mounted on the sides of the aircraft. Its design supports launch directly from warships, rapid movement over water, and fast pursuit of hostile craft that try to exploit gaps between islands or rush commercial shipping. Its top speed is around 333 kilometers per hour, with a service ceiling near 4,000 meters and a day-night sensor suite that allows target detection and tracking in difficult weather. And more importantly, its combat radius is sufficient to cover almost the entire Strait of Hormuz without major strain. When Apache and Seahawk helicopters operate in coordination with U.S. destroyers, the fast boat swarm encounters a layered opponent that is difficult to outmaneuver. The boats must evade overhead surveillance, survive long-range missile shots, endure direct gunfire, and still somehow close with heavily defended ships. That is an extremely hard problem. This is the central tactical point in the entire confrontation. Iran's Mosquito Fleet doctrine was built first and foremost to threaten large surface combatants, such as destroyers and missile frigates. Those ships are powerful, but in shallow, narrow waters, crowded with islands, they cannot move with the agility of small boats. Iranian Fastcraft rely heavily on that geography. Their crews seek to use inlets, islands, and coastal clutter to mask approach routes, close suddenly, and then break contact before a larger ship can bring all its weapons to bear. But once armed helicopters dominate the air above the battle space, much of that advantage begins to disappear. From the air, the narrow channels and hidden corners no longer provide true concealment. The shallow water, the island cover, the twisting routes that once helped the swarm now become much less useful. And the boats are exposed in a way they were never meant to be. And that is where the story rises from tactical combat to strategic pressure. What happened at Hormuz was not only the sinking of 6 fast boats. The Trump administration launched Operation Project Freedom with a larger diplomatic and military purpose to convince Tehran that it is gradually losing the instruments that made the Strait such an effective bargaining chip. The American message appears increasingly direct. Your coastal missile threat can be managed. Your drone pressure can be reduced. Your swarm boats can be hunted from the air. Your attacks against Gulf states can be intercepted more often than they succeed. If that message holds, then the strategic consequences for Tehran could be serious. Iran's ability to threaten maritime traffic through Hormuz has long been one of its strongest cards in any confrontation. With outside powers, it gave Tehran leverage far beyond the size of its conventional navy. That leverage rested on the idea that the world would always fear disruption in the Strait more than Iran would fear escalation. But if freedom of navigation can be maintained under an American military shield, then Tehran may begin to lose the final tool that has allowed it to pressure global markets and foreign governments simultaneously. Nearly all of Iran's geopolitical weight in the Gulf has revolved around its capacity to endanger the world's oil route. So if its fast boats continue to be destroyed at the current pace, Iranian decision makers may face a much harder strategic reality. The larger question now is whether that pressure creates cracks inside the Iranian leadership, or whether it drives the system toward an even riskier response. Another possibility remains equally important, that Tehran eventually returns to negotiations under harsher conditions and with less leverage than before. The contest at Hormuz is no longer about a handful of speedboats. It is becoming a test of military readiness, economic endurance, coalition politics, and control over the most consequential sea lane on the planet. At the same time, every military claim in this confrontation should be treated with caution. Battle damage reports in real time are often incomplete, selective, or shaped by political objectives. The United States, Iran, and regional actors all have reasons to emphasize success and minimize vulnerability. That caution matters because the information battle is now inseparable from the physical one. Claims of perfect interception, total losses, or failed enemy strikes serve immediate strategic purposes. They strengthen morale, reassure allies, and signal resolve to adversaries. Even so, the broad outline of the crisis is now difficult to deny. The Strait of Hormuz has entered a new period of open military friction. Commercial traffic, regional infrastructure, and international diplomacy are all being pulled into the same dangerous current. For shipping companies, insurers, and energy markets, the implications are immediate. Every successful transit now carries strategic meaning. Every drone launch, every missile warning, every radar contact can alter freight costs, oil prices, and the political calculations of states far beyond the Gulf. For military planners, the lesson is equally sharp. Small boat swarms remain dangerous, but only under conditions where they can close distance and exploit confusion. Once airborne, surveillance, precision fire, and layered defenses are fully synchronized, the swarm can be broken before it ever reaches decisive range. For Iran, that may be the most troubling development of all. A doctrine designed to offset conventional weakness may be facing a countermeasure set that is faster, better rehearsed, and harder to saturate than before. If so, Tehran will need either to adapt or to escalate into other domains. For the United States, however, success at sea does not automatically resolve the wider problem. Protecting a shipping lane is one thing, sustaining that protection amid missile threats, drone attacks, proxy pressure, and regional political strain is something else entirely. Tactical success can coexist with strategic fragility. That is why the coming days matter as much as the opening clash. If more ships transit safely, Washington's position strengthens. If energy infrastructure continues to be hit, or if more countries are pulled into the firing line, the crisis could broaden faster than either side intends. What happened on the 5th of May was not merely another tense day in a troubled waterway. It was a direct test of competing military doctrines, competing political messages, and competing visions of who controls risk in the Gulf. One side relied on speed, pressure, and the threat of disruption. The other responded with layered firepower, coalition signaling, and a public determination to keep the corridor open. The outcome of that contest is still unfolding. For now, the images remain stark. Helicopters sweeping low over open water, and fast boats racing into a zone already covered by guns and missiles. Commercial vessels moving under escort to a passage that carries a fifth of the world's oil. Governments issuing warnings while markets watch every headline. The immediate clash may have lasted only minutes. Its consequences may last far longer. If the first day of Operation Project Freedom becomes the model for what follows, then the Strait of Hormuz could enter a sustained phase of armed escort and repeated interception. That would keep trade moving, but it would also normalize a high-risk military presence in one of the world's most combustible choke points. If, on the other hand, Iran adjusts its tactics, disperses its pressure, or shifts more heavily toward indirect attacks on infrastructure and regional shipping, then the confrontation could become harder to contain and far more unpredictable. Either way, a threshold has been crossed. The battle is no longer theoretical. The doctrines have met in open water, and the world is now watching to see whether this is the beginning of a contained maritime campaign or the first chapter of a much wider regional confrontation. What happens next may decide not only the future of shipping through Hormuz, but also the balance between deterrence and escalation across the Gulf. Will military control of the sea lane hold, or will the pressure simply move into more dangerous forms? Share your view. Has this operation restored freedom of navigation, or has it opened the door to a larger and more dangerous contest? The next move in the Strait of Hormuz may shape far more than the waters of the Gulf.